Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Boardmasters, and my name is Chris Mullins. Today we'll be looking at how to play Superclub. Now this isn't going to be a complete playthrough of the game, and I'm not going to do an overly deep dive into the rules. You're going to come and join me on the table in just a moment, and we'll play through a season as well as the following finance stage, because you won't be doing that in the first turn, just so that you can get a feel of the rules and the sequence of events and how the game all flows together. And then you'll come back and join me here while I talk about some of the rule amendments that I think I will be looking to bring in when I actually play the game. And also there is one aspect of the game I want to put a focus on that I don't think they did in the rulebook or in the tutorial on their site, which I think is a really useful tool, but they seem to have neglected it in their information for the game, and that may be because it isn't actually that useful, and they've realized that after hundreds of plays and all the play testing they've done. I am more than willing to accept that I may be wrong on it just because I haven't played the game enough, but I'll talk about that later. Timestamps will be at the bottom underneath in the description, so if you want to skip ahead to that, feel free. But for anyone else who wants to see how the game is played, join me down on the table and let's get started. Okay, hello again, and now I'm just going to run through a typical season plus the finance stage for the second season, just to give you all an indication of how the game plays. Now down here we have the order for the off season. So we start with finance. At the beginning of the game, it's very basic. You're just giving out the starting money, which will be dictated by how long a game you want. So if you're playing a short game, you'll give out 150 million to each player. A standard game is 120, which is what I've got here. And if you want to play a longer game, then it's 90 million per player. So I've done that, so I'm just going to move that out of the way. And then what you get into is the draft. So every player has to construct a squad of 16 players, and they draw players from this area here. I think it's important to say at this point that those players are free. You don't have to pay for them, so you don't have to worry about, oh well, I've already spent X amount of money getting this 4-star player, so I better sign a 2-star player just to even it out. There's nothing like that. It's just grab the best players, whatever players you want, get them. The order of play, it says in the book that you roll a dice to see who goes first. It doesn't really matter, because no matter how many players you are playing with, that dictates how many times you do a draft. So if you've got 2 players, you draft 2 lots of players. So you clear that board, fill it again, and then draw them again. And then you do it an extra time for 3 players, an extra time for 4 players, and so on and so on. So every player will get to go first in a draft. So it doesn't make too much difference. But you would do that. I'm just going to draft the first player for my purple team. So for example, looking at what we've got there, we've got a 5-star, or we've got 4 stars, or we've got 4 with a potential of 5. So I'll probably go for this striker, 5-star striker, and pop him in my team. The blue team would then pick their next player. They might go for a 4-star midfielder with the potential of getting to 5 stars, and that continues until that board is clear. So if you give me a second, I'm just going to edit while I draft the teams for both the squads for both teams, so bear with me. Okay, so we fully drafted 2 teams, so that is the end of the draft. I just wanted to highlight Garibaldi here because he is the star player in the game. He cannot get obtained in the draft, so if he does turn up in the draft, you have to put him back into the pile, and he is too good for that. So I'm just going to put him aside because that's the basic Garibaldi. I've got the Kickstarter Golden Garibaldi in the deck already. Once the draft is completed, you then turn this over to give you the World of Football. And this is basically the transfer database for the game. So I'll just pop the key staff on there, the SuperCup cards on there, and then the rule suggests making 6 relatively even piles for each of the continents. Personally, I like doing it a bit uneven so that you have like for example, more players in South America and in Europe, just because I find that a bit more thematic and realistic to real life. And then you get a bit more limited as you go to the smaller continents. I've done that South America a bit too big, so we'll take some of those, put them in Asia, and then we move on to the next phase. So I'm just going to get rid of this team here because that will just be used to illustrate how to play a game during the on-season. And I'll also clear my squad out of the way because we won't need that. Oh, actually, I'll bring it back because we will need it for the training phase. So the next phase after finance is training. So I'll bring back my board here. So unless you're playing a shorter game, in which case you have the next level up of all these investments, you start with the most basic levels. So the training pitch, the free one, gives you the ability to add maximum of 1 star to 1 player. So you look at your players, the players that have nothing but full stars, they cannot be developed at all. The ones with empty stars are the ones with potential that you can increase and improve. So I think I'm going to look at De Jesus first. He is a 2-star player with the potential of getting to 6. So in order to train a player, you roll a dice. In this case, I've got a 4, and that tells you whether you can train him or not. So if the dice you roll is higher than the number of stars you have, then you improve that player. So in this case, I did, because he is a 2-star player and I rolled a 4. Now I'm just going to use one of the green cards just to indicate something there. In order to get the improved player, you have these numbers in the top left hand corner. So I don't know if you can see that on Sosa. On there it's 26 and 27. That corresponds to the player card in this pile of developed players. So if we go back to De Jesus, his numbers are 19 and 22. And so you look through this pile to get numbers 19 and 22, which are on the back. If you've improved them by 1 star, you get the first card, so 19. And then as you improve their stars, you'll be getting further up. So there we go. Card 19 is the 3-star De Jesus. And that is also why in the rulebook it states you must never shuffle these developed cards, the developed players, because obviously if you do, they're going to be all out of order and it's just going to make it a whole lot harder for you to find the relevant player. So he is now developed, so I can place him back in my team. Personally, just to keep things tidy, once a player has improved and I don't need that card anymore, I'll pop him in the inactive players thing. So now I will get rid of that squad page because I'm not going to need that for the rest of the off season. So we've done our training. The next stage is the scouting. So at the beginning, your local scouting means you can scout 1 player, which you can pick from any of these piles. So let's go with Europe, just because that's where we are. And we have got a 5-star midfielder, which is a very valuable asset to have, particularly right at the beginning of the game. In terms of his value, I don't know if you'll see this on a yellow card, but there are 2 numbers on each player. There's the bottom left value, which is always the lower. That is the scouting value, so that is how much you buy the player for if you find him during the scouting phase. So I can buy Parker for 30 million. The other value is the much higher value. That is how much you have to start the bidding for when you come to deadline day, but we'll cover that in a moment. So we have 30 million there to buy Parker, which I will be doing because he is a 5-star midfielder, which will make a big difference to my team. So I'll pay the 30 and Parker then goes straight into my squad. There we go. Oh, I messed the money up. Knew that would happen. Okay, so that's scouting done. The 4th stage is your investments. Now there are 4 different things you can do in this phase, but each turn you can only do 2 of them. So you can improve any of the 3 things here. So that is your training pitch, your scouting, your arena. You can't bypass a stage, so you can't go straight from level 1 to level 3. So let's just look at these. I'll lay these out here. And hopefully you'll be able to see them clear enough on the camera there. But I will zoom in when I edit this so that you can see it a bit better. So the next stage, if we look at training first, so for 15 million you get the training ground, so you can add 2 stars to 2 players, which if you're lucky with your dice rolls will help you to develop your team a lot quicker. As you go through, the next one is 3 stars to 3 players. The final stage, the training complex, gives up to 4 stars to 4 players, plus 1 star guaranteed for 1 player. So if you were following earlier, you need to roll a higher dice number than their current level of stars. So if you need to get a 5-star player to a 6-star player, you have to roll a 6, which obviously is very unlikely. If you have the training complex, you can just guarantee that 1 star. Moving on to the scouting. The regional, you can scout 2 players, national is 3, international is 5, so that gives you more choice of the players that you can potentially buy. Then in the stadiums give you your money depending on where you finish in the league table. So the standard one, depending on where you finish, you can earn 20 million for a newly promoted team, going up to 50 million for a title contender. The park, it ranges from 30 to 75, the arena 40 to 100, the Coliseum 50 to 150. So that's going to make an awful lot of difference in terms of your income. In terms of what I'm going to buy, I do love training my players, so I'm going to spend the 15 million to upgrade the training ground, and when you do, you just place it on top of there. So let me just get my change. And then the other thing you can do in this round, I'm just going to clear these off so I can illustrate that. Okay, so the final thing you can do in this round is hire a member of key staff. So to do this, you draw 2 and have a look at them. So here we've got Alfie Ness, the technical coach, which gives you a 3 boost to your midfield score. He costs 40 million. And then the next one is 2 Banks of 4, who's the defensive coach, and he gives 3 defense for 40 million. Now I'm going to do that actually. I'm looking at my team. My defense is pretty shocking at this point. I've only got the default 1-star goalkeeper, a couple of 1-star defenders, and then 1 4-star. So I'm going to hire 2 Banks of 4 for 40 million. And then we pop Alfie Ness back at the bottom, and we cycle through those. Oh, that's my money left. So personally for me, when I hire a member of key staff, if it's one that gives a specific bonus to a row, I like to place them next to that row just so that you can keep track of it a bit easier. And then the final stage of deadline day of the off season, I've spoiled it now. The final stage of the off season is deadline day, and this is where you auction off your players. So you always do the number of players playing the game plus 1. So for example, in this one we've got 2 teams, so we'll be drawing 3 players for the deadline day auction. So we pick the first one up. So we get Linzo. As I mentioned earlier, the bottom left number, which hopefully will be a bit more visible on a green card, is the one where you start the bidding. Now for a 1-star striker, I don't imagine anyone's going to bother getting into an auction unless they really desperately, if they're 1 star away from a promotion, for example, they may want to do that. But we'll pass on him this time. We've got Ocasio, which is a 3-star with the potential of 4, so he could be in demand, particularly earlier on in the game, but the starting bid is 34 million, which is pretty pricey for a 3-star player, but you may be very keen to get a leg up early on. Obviously I can't bid for him because I've only got 5 million, but the other team may want to. But just for the purposes of this, I'm just going to pass. I'm just illustrating what you do. And again, a 2-star with a potential of 3. He costs 23 million as opposed to 13 million if you were to scout him, so it is a big difference, plus any premium for getting the auction. And that is the end of the off season. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this out of the way because we're not going to need that again for this stage. And then I'm just going to take a second while I tot up the squad strengths, and then I'll mark that on the board and I'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, welcome back. I've totted up the two squads now, and conveniently both teams have a squad strength of 39. Obviously, based on the way we've done this, I would have expected blue to be a little bit higher if we were playing a genuine game, because obviously we skipped their training scouting and they didn't bid for anyone on deadline day, so they had a lot more potential to actually develop their squad than my purple team. But basically we're starting the season on a level footing, so I'm just gonna now show you how you do the on season. So down this side you have the fixture list depending on how many players you have. So for example, in this a 2-player game, the first game both players sim, then it's 1 versus 2, then it's another sim, 2v1 and another sim. So each season is 5 games. You can increase that to 10 games, and the purist in me screams that we should be doing that, because the standard points in a 5-game season are 0 points for a loss, 2 for a draw, 6 for a win. And then obviously if you double that so that you're playing the 10 games per season, that becomes the traditional 0, 1 and 3 points. And that is why the purist in me is screaming to do it. But I appreciate that with this game, it's going to take at least 3, 4, maybe even 5, 6 seasons before somebody gets to the end. And if you're doing 10 games a season, that's going to be a long old game, which I've got no problem with, but it's just making sure you've got the time to do it. So if I do have a day free, then I would look to do the 10 games, certainly. But for this, I'm just going to show the 5. And this is where you start to put your squad together. You pick your formation and you put your players together. So I have done that with my purple team. And we are going for a 3-4-3. Now, the most keen among you may notice a couple of things about my side, in that we've got, for example, Boatwright here, this 1-star midfielder in ahead of Aguiar, who is a 1-star as well, but he has the potential to 4. There is one big reason why I have picked Boatwright over Aguiar, or even over Buck, who is a 2-star player. And that is the chemistry aspect. And that's something we haven't looked at yet, so I will illustrate it on these green ones because it's a bit more visible. On some of these cards you will have stars. They will have half stars either on the right, on the left, or sometimes on both. When you place a player next to them with the corresponding star, then they have chemistry. So they play better together, which gives you an extra star when you are totting up your team. Now I suppose having a 2-star with no chemistry or a 1-star with chemistry is basically the same thing, but I just wanted to do that to highlight that to you. Also, if anyone is watching this and totting up the stars in their head, I've got a 39 squad strength for this team, even though I've got 40 stars here, because I've only got the default keeper which is given, and you do not count his star when you are calculating your squad strength. So then you would go into the season. In order to sim a game, you don't need your squad at all. You just roll a couple of dice. So in this case I've got a 7, and then you look along here, and depending on what level you are will dictate what result you got from your dice roll. So the level I am, which is an established club, if I roll a 2 to a 6, then I lose the game. 7 or 8, I draw. 9 or a 12, then I win. So in this case I've drawn again because I rolled a 7, so I get 2 points. So my point marker, which starts on my score marker, moves forward 2. Obviously if you're doing a 10 game season, that would be 1. And then we'll sim the blue team. They got a 7 as well, so they are tracking me all the way. Again, if you're playing with 6 managers and you're all on the same, it's going to get a bit cozy. But now I just want to illustrate how you play against someone else. I've already set up the blue team as well. Obviously when you're doing this you're not showing your squads to each other, but I will just doing this as an illustration of how to do it. So each team has 3 rows in their team, so you have your defence, your midfield and your strikers. Your goalkeeper counts as part of your defence. One thing I will mention as well is players playing out of position. So we've got these players in position now. There is possibility to play players out of position. For example, if I remove Valerie here, you will see that there is a red backing to that space. That is because you have to have a minimum of 3 defenders. So if you didn't have a defender in the squad and you had to play a midfielder there, like for example, if this team gets an injury, they're going to be in trouble. You can play a midfielder there, or potentially even a striker. If you ever have to play a player out of position like this, they lose half a star the further they are away from their natural position. So a midfielder will lose half a star playing in defence or in attack, whereas a striker would lose a whole star to play in defence or half a star in midfield, and vice versa. A defender would lose half a star to play in midfield or a whole star to play up front. Goalkeepers can't play out of position and outfield players can't play in goal, which is why they have this default keeper in case you don't get one in the draft or in your scouting. And one other thing I want to focus on is players like Touré, who are purple. They are utility players, and that means they can play in any position with no cost to their stars. So you come to the match, you unveil your squads to each other, and then it's time to play. So the first thing that you always do in a match is play the midfield against the midfield. So you'd both roll your dice. So this looks like it's going to be an easy win for the blue team, but you tot it up. So for me it's 3, 6, 7, 12 plus 2 chemistry stars, which is 14, plus the 5, 19. The blue team don't have any chemistry, but they've got 4, 7, 10, 13, plus another 11, so they have got 24, so they win that match. The next phase is the attack of the team who won the midfield battle, so the blue team in this case, up against the defence of the losing team. So again, you would both roll your dice, and again, looks like my team's going to get thumped on this potentially, but you would add up. So the blue attack have got 4 plus 3 plus 3, which is 10, plus a 1 chemistry star, plus the 8 on the board, which is 19. I would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus a chemistry star, which is 8, plus 5 is 13. I do have a defensive coach, which gives me a plus 3, which gives me 16, but I've still lost that battle, in which case I've lost the match because I've lost 2 out of 3. So we then wouldn't roll my attack against their defense. One thing I will also point out in this, because the blue team rolled a double, that means they either got an injury or a game changer. Now, because it was their attack, if they had they go to the 4th spot because they rolled double 4. If they had a 4th striker, that striker would be injured and they'd be unable to use him for the rest of the season and would have to replace him with one of their subs. In this case, it was empty, and so they would draw a game changer, and in this case, they would get this. Bad news, read out loud, low attendance, your budget needs cutting due to failing income, pay 30 million. So that's obviously very bad news, and the blue team would be cursing their luck there because that's going to hit their income at the end of the season. And that's basically how you play a match. So you go through the fixture list until you've completed all the lists on there. For example, on that one, the blue team beat me. So they then move their marker. We were both on 41. Their marker would move on 6 points. And then you'd keep simming, and by the end of the season, hypothetically, let's just go with this, just because it's something I want to talk about next. So in this case, the blue team has won the league because they finished higher, in which case they would draw a SuperCup card, and they would keep that face down by their folder. Whoever wins the league each season collects one of those. When somebody has 3, they have the option of playing the SuperCup final, which is how you win the game. If you have 3 and you don't feel your team is strong enough, you can delay the SuperCup final, but if you do, then you cannot play it until you win another season and gain another SuperCup card, and then you have 4 to choose from. If you did want to play it, you would choose one at random, flip it over. In this case, we've got Mexico City, and on the card, it gives that team's attack, midfield, and defense stars. You would play that team in exactly the same way that you would play anyone else, as I've just illustrated. The main difference is that you cannot use any game changers or key staff cards, but also any injured players are fit again. So it's basically an even footing no boosts anywhere. It's just you against them in a fight to the finish to see if you can win the game. Obviously, if you lose that match, you discard your 3 Super Cups, and then you have to try and earn another 3. And that would obviously take at least 6 seasons, so probably by then someone else will have hit the 100-point mark. If more than one player hits the 100-point mark in the same season, then the top 2, the 2 with the strongest squads, play a Super Duper Cup final in exactly the same way. So no game changers, no staff, but no injuries. And that's basically the season. One other thing, depending on where you finished, you would then get a captain boost. So for example, in this case, the blue team won, so they would get the captain boost number 1, which gives them an extra 100 million in their finances. And then they would attach this to one of their players in their squad, and he would give them a 1-star boost for all their matches in the next season. Whereas I would get the +2 captain boost, which gives me 90 million, so a bit less money, but any player I attach this to will get a 2-star bonus. So hopefully that sort of brings it back to an even keel. And I really like that mechanic. I can't wait to try that out. And that's the end of the first season. So if you then move into the second season, you clear these off the board, your squad strength stays the same. Well, no, sorry, you don't clear these off the board yet, because the finance stage is gathering your earnings, which is your stadium plus your position. So if I bring mine back, you'll see on the purple field, I finished as an established club, so I would get 30 million for that. Assuming the blue team are on the field as well, because they finished as a mid-table club, they would get 40 million. So the higher you finish, the more you earn. And so you would gather that income in, and then you pay your players' wages, which is the number of stars you have in your squad times 1,000,000. So these indicate that we both have a squad strength of 39, so both of us would have to pay 39 million in wages. And then finally, in the finance of the second season and any subsequent seasons, there is the optional pro player rule where you can buy an unhappy player. And this happens, for example, the blue team are now a mid-table team, so they appeal to 5-star players, whereas I am only established team and only appeal to 4-star players. So what could potentially happen is the blue manager could look at my squad here and bid for one of my players that are potentially unhappy. I've got a 5-star striker in Mahmood, I've got a 5-star midfielder in Parker. So the blue manager could say, I'm going to bid for your unhappy player, one of your unhappy players, because they want to play at a higher level. And basically, they would have to offer 15 times the number of stars. So for a 5-star player, that would be 75 million, for example. And I have a couple of choices then. I can either say, yes, okay, I'll have the money, you can have that 5-star player, and off he goes. Or I can try and negotiate and say, okay, you can have him, but not for 75 million, I want 95 million, given that you've just had 100 million from your captain boost, for example. Other than that, you can refuse to sell, or if you can't negotiate a deal, then you keep the player, but the player is unhappy, and that means you have to turn him upside down over here, and you cannot use him at all for the coming season, which is a big loss. To compensate for that, you get to add 1 development star to any of your players, because they are now going to step up, take that star mantle and carry your team. So for example, with Para here, I could turn him into a 5-star defender, giving me a little boost in one of my weakest areas in the club. So it might be worth keeping that unhappy player in order to get that training boost, because even though he's unhappy and he won't play, you still keep him in your squad strength. I do have a little amendment to that rule that I'll talk about later, so if you want to hear about that, please keep listening. But that is basically how you play Superclub. Once you've done the unhappy players, you go straight into the training, and then the scouting and the investment and the deadline day, as I've showed you all that earlier, and then you rinse and repeat the season, and you keep going until somebody is the Superclub. I hope that helped, and we'll go back to me at the table and I'll talk about the potential rule amendments. And there's one particular focus that I didn't look at here deliberately, because it's something they didn't cover in their tutorial on their website and isn't really covered in their rulebook either. So I'll see you in a moment. Thank you. Okay, so that's basically how a season in Superclub goes. I'm not going to carry on beyond that because you're basically just repeating that same formula a number of times until somebody either achieves 100 points to win the game or wins the SuperCup final in the way that I showed you in that video. So as I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to talk about a couple of the rule amendments that I would be looking to bring in, as well as focus on one aspect of the game that I don't think the game did enough of in the rules or in the tutorial. And again, feel free to comment down below if you disagree with me or if you feel they're good amendments, if they're bad, and please, if you think they're bad, please explain to me why, because if you've played the game, then you will probably know more than me at this point, because again, I've only done a few run-throughs on my own. But I want to start firstly with that focus on the rule that I think they've neglected a bit, and that is selling players. Now, in the rulebook, it is mentioned very briefly in the text for the optional pro rule. So for anyone who hasn't used the optional pro rule or has ignored that up to now, they won't know about it at all. They will be completely unaware that you can sell players. And they also didn't mention it in their tutorial video either. Now, I understand the point they make in the rules is that you're going to find it hard to sell your unwanted players during the season, or it may be hard to get other players to sell their players that you want, and that's a fair point. But I'm not talking about this from the perspective of trading between players. I think the key aspect of this is the fact that you can sell any player at any time during the off-season, basically to the bank, in terms of if you're just short of cash. And the reason I think that's so valuable, for example, say you get to deadline day and not deadline day, sorry, forgive me. You get to the scouting section and Garibaldi comes up and he's there, he's 40 million, you've only got 30 million in cash. Do you just have to pass up Garibaldi, or can you sell those two one-star midfielders that are just sat on your bench taking up spots in your club? Because you can sell a one-star defender, for example, for 5 million. So if you've got two, that's 10 million of cash instantly right there. So that if you're 10 million short of Garibaldi and you've got a couple of one-star players you can get rid of, then you can sign him and you've got yourself the best player in the game. So it is a massive benefit to be able to sell those players for the scouting value, the value in the bottom right of the card, at any time. Same as if you were 10, 15 million short of that training ground upgrade that you wanted. Got a couple of unused 1-2-star players on your bench, sell them to make up the shortfall, and you don't have to worry about being short on cash. It may even be a genuine strategy that if you're only buying something for 20 million, 25 million, you may want to just use the sub players that you've got on your bench and save the cash for deadline day when you know there's going to be an auction. But I just wanted to highlight the potential of that because, as I said, it's only mentioned as a throwaway comment in the rulebook and it's not mentioned at all in their tutorial video, but I think it is potentially a very powerful strategy to use. And again, as I said earlier, I'm more than willing to accept the fact that I may be wrong and that through hundreds of play tests and whatnot, the creators realized that it wasn't really relevant and they didn't make use of it, and so they didn't bother to mention it. But that may well be the case, but I wanted to highlight it here. Now, going into the rule amendments I will propose, there's a couple, one of which is regarding injuries and game changers. Primarily the fact that they're not used in simulator games, because I think that is grossly unfair. So if you remember from the playthrough, we did touch on those, and basically when you are playing a match or simming a match, when you roll the dice, if you roll a double, you will get an injury or a game changer depending on what row of your team you are playing at that point. If you're midfield versus midfield, you'll get an injury in the midfield. If you're playing your attack versus their defense and you get an injury, it will be one of your attackers. Understandably, they say you don't get injuries in simulated matches, because obviously you're only rolling your dice once as opposed to each time for the row in your team. So that I assume they made that rule because then you couldn't. It wasn't linked directly to a row, so it wouldn't necessarily state you have an injury to a midfielder in the same way that when you're playing a human player does. But yeah, that just feels really unfair to me. If somebody rolls, say, a double 4 in a match against a human and they've got 4 midfielders, they're going to have an injury to their 4th midfielder. They could potentially roll 3 doubles in one match, get 3 injuries, and lose the game and get no benefit whatsoever. Whereas the next person who's simming a game can roll a double 4, potentially even win that game depending on what size club they are, and suffer no injury whatsoever, which is hugely unfair. As I said, that one player can get nothing out of the game, lose 1 or more players to injuries, while someone else rolls exactly the same thing and gets full points for a win. So I will definitely be looking to bring in injuries in simulated matches. And in terms of the position, I would be looking to organise it in a sequence of, depending which simulated match it is in that season, that will dictate which position you get an injury in. So for example, if it's your first simulated match, it'll be an injury to your midfield. We will then assume that you've won that stage. Even if you don't win the match, the next simulated match would then go on to your attackers, because that is the second position you ideally want to be rolling against in a match, because that means you've won the first stage. So your second simulated match will be your attackers. Your third simulated match will be your defenders. And if you get to a 4th simulated match, then you just start that all over again. And I think that just evens the playing field out a bit. Similar for game changers. If you roll a double 5 in a match, yes, you may win that position against someone, but you're going to get a game changer, which hypothetically could see you losing 30 million because you've lost revenue, could see you losing a player for the rest of the season, which is a massive penalty, really. Whereas, again, the person simming a match can roll a double 5, they're guaranteed to win the game, 6 points, or 3 if you're playing the long version, and no penalty at all. So, again, I would just propose that if you're simming a match and you roll a double, which, depending on, again, what row you're competing on that one, so if it's your first simulated match, you roll a double 5, there's no midfielder in that slot, you get a game changer. Your second simulated match, if you roll a double 3 and you've got a striker there, you get an injury. Third simulated match, you roll a double 6, of course you'll never have a player there, so you get another game changer. And it just evens things out a bit between the simulated matches and the real matches, because the potential to lose multiple players to injury for a whole season in the same match, just because you happen to be playing another person, is a massive penalty for a situation that you actually want to have more, because you don't want to be simming matches as much as possible. You want to be playing other people. That's the fun of the game, yet you're being penalised for it. So that's my first major rule amendment. The other one is around the unhappy player bids. So as I mentioned, there is the pro rule where at the end of the season, if a team finishes in a higher league, then they can bid for a player in a lower league, depending on what stars that player is. So for example, if you finish in a 5-star league and one of your rivals is in the 4-star league, you can bid for one of their 5-star players, and they either have to sell him to you or they can't use him for the entirety of that season. Which is fine, that's thematic. I actually really like that rule. The one amendment that I want to bring into it is if you refuse to sell that player, you've then got a 5-star player sulking on your bench. If somehow throughout the off season, whether it's through training a number of players, whether it's signing players during the scouting or deadline day, if you then get your squad token up to the table with the 5-star level, that player then stops being unhappy because you are now playing at the level he wants to be. And for me, that is really thematic. I think it adds an extra risk versus reward element to the person making the bid as well, because as the way the rule is at the moment, they can completely destabilize an opposition with no penalty to themselves, really. Whereas and they will know that should they destabilise that player's gone for the whole season. Whereas with this amendment, they will destabilise another team, but there is the potential for that team to rescue the situation, get the free training start for having an unhappy player, and then still get that player back if they're able to elevate their club enough during that off season. And again, I just think that adds a really nice thematic layer to it. So that's definitely something I will be trying out. Again, may not work. I mean, these guys put in a lot of work for a number of years getting this game right, and you know, maybe it just didn't appeal to them, or maybe they tried it and it didn't work, and I am wrong. But I'm happy to take that if that's the case, and if you've tried it or if they're watching, please let me know if that's the case. But I'll certainly be looking to implement those rules when I play, and when I do my review of the game, I will tell you how that goes. But if you've watched to this point, again, I just want to thank you all for spending the time with me. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you have a good evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.